بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, today we'll be moving on to the next two letters, which are the letters Fa and the letter Qaaf. First, we'll discuss that how are Fa and Qaaf pronounced. Then we'll discuss how Fa and Qaaf are pronounced when they're Mutaharrik and when they're Sakin. And finally, specifically, how is Qaaf Mushaddad pronounced? Meaning when a Qaaf has a Shadda and you are stopping on it, how is that pronounced? Because there are some errors that do take place when that happens. So first thing is, how is the letter Fa pronounced? Fa is very straightforward. So Fa is pronounced when the upper teeth make contact with the inner side of the lower lips. So you're taking your upper teeth and you're putting it on your lower lips. And after that, you're basically just putting out air. That's a Fa. So that's all that is there is to a Fa. So once the upper teeth are touching the inner side of the lower lips, the teeth have to apply a bit of pressure on the lower lips so they don't open up. And then air is just released to pronounce the letter Fa. So since we have the letter F in the English language, it's pretty easy to kind of duplicate the letter Fa. That's as complicated as the letter Fa gets. So let's just move on to quickly to the examples. So when Fa has a haraka, we release the teeth from the not the upper lips, from the lower lips, and then we make the motion for the haraka. So for example, so when you say the fatha damma kasra, you obviously have to release your teeth from the lower lips. So there's fa'alta, fa'alta. Then there's futihat, futihat. And then fi. So fa, fu, and fi. Fa, fu. So you start off with your teeth on your lower lips, and then you let it go and you have to say the haraka while still sending out air and sound. Fa, fu, fi. When Fa is Sakin, the teeth will remain on the inside of the lower lips while you continuously release air. So the tongue doesn't. So the teeth they stay on the lower lips while the letter is Sakin. So for example, yafsuquna. So the teeth stay on the lips. Yafsuquna. Second example, yufsidu. Yufsidu. Third example is taqiftumuhum. So yuf, qif. So while you're on the Fa, you're supposed to keep your teeth on the actual lower lip. And everyone basically does this, but this is just as a reminder. And that's about it. So obviously you don't stretch it like I was doing. I was just doing that for the sake of example. Otherwise, it's just said normally. Yafsuquna, yufsidu, taqiftumuhum. It's not, you don't stretch it like yaf. That's just for example's sake. So that's the letter Fa, it's very straightforward letter. Let's move on to the letter Qaaf. The letter Qaaf. So Qaaf is pronounced when contact is made between, number one, the back of the tongue. You see the back of the tongue, and right above it, the soft upper palate. So all the way at the back of your mouth, it first starts off really hard, then it gets softer, 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 and all the way at the back, it gets very, very soft at the top of your mouth. So the back of the tongue rises and it fully touches that and it closes off the entire area. Once you do that and the area is completely closed off, the letter Qaaf can be pronounced. So as I'm mentioning here, the area closes off completely for the sound of Qaaf to be produced. So the entire area, as you can see, is completely closed off. So the back of the tongue is fully risen to the upper palate and there's no room at all. That is why this is another one of those, as I was mentioning, this is a letter of qalqala, right? Because on the letters of qalqala, when you close them off completely, it's also a letter of something called shidda. This has the quality of shidda. Shidda means that when you pronounce the letter, you must close it off completely. Because it's being closed off completely, it's called shidda. Anyway, we discussed that a long time ago when we discussed the letter Ba. But anyway, this is how the letter Qaaf is pronounced. That's what's happening in the back of your mouth. Now let's go through the examples so it's a bit easier for us to understand. So when Qaaf has a haraka, the tongue is obviously, the back of the tongue is touching the upper soft palate fully. But when we have to say the fatha damma kasra, you have to let go of that area and then say the fatha, dhamma, or kasra. So for example, qatala. So it starts off with our upper tongue touching the upper palate, and then qa, qatala. Second example, yarzuqu, qu. So it starts off touching the upper palate, and then you let it go, qu. The last one, qisas. So it starts off touching the upper palate, and then you say the letter qisas. So qa, qu, qi. So if you actually do it slowly, you'll feel your back of your tongue fully touching the upper palate. And then once you let it go, that's what happens. So qa, qu, qi. And obviously, this should not be like the sound of a Qaaf. Some people accidentally, mistakenly, and accidentally sometimes mix Qaaf with a Qaaf. Not in here, but like maybe in certain words. Next, when Qaaf is Sakin, the Qaaf can't stay in that area. Like I mentioned, for most letters, when any letter is Sakin, your tongue or teeth, they're going to stay wherever they were. Like for example, for the Fa, the teeth stayed on top of the lips. It stayed there. It didn't move. But for Qaaf, since it's a letter of qalqala, it's not possible to physically do that. When you're saying a Qaaf that's Sakin, you can't keep your tongue touching the upper palate and keep it closed. The Sakin sound won't come out. It will die off. So we have to release the tongue without making the motion for any haraka at all. So for example, and since Qaaf is a letter of qalqala, this will end up resulting in an echo sound, the sound of qalqala. So for example, taqu, taqwim, fi ahsani taqwim. So it will not turn into taqawim or taqiwim or taquwim, taqu. So you're basically touching the upper palate and then just quickly letting it go, but not doing anything else at all. Taqwim. Then the next example, iqtaraba, iqtaraba. So simply touching and letting go. Iqtaraba. Last example, shiqwatuna. So shiqw. First example, taqw. Second example, iqw. Third example, shiqwatuna. So if you were to fully close it off and not let it go, the sound won't really come out. It will turn to taqweem, iqtaraba, shiqwatuna. It doesn't come out. So you have to let it go for the qalqala. The qalqala naturally happens. It naturally happens. Another example with the end of an ayah. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. So it can't be falaq. You have to let it go. Falaq. You have to let the top tongue go from the upper palate. Falaq. مِن شَرِّ مَا خَلَقُ. Same thing. The whole surah has the qalqalas going on. So that is Qaaf, Mutaharrik, and Sakin. Now, one issue I wanted to get into because it comes over and over, and I think in today's recitation it came 3 to 4 times, is when Qaaf has a shadda and you are stopping on it. So when Qaaf comes at the end of an ayah, and when Qaaf comes at the end of an ayah, or not at the end of an ayah, but anywhere you're stopping, maybe there's a ta, right? Maybe there's a ta or jeen, whatever sign, but you're stopping on the Qaaf, and that Qaaf also has a shadda on it, right? The little W, the tashdeed, has a shadda or the tashdeed on it. Then there's going to be a qalqala, but there's a few technicalities there. And I discussed this in a lot of detail when I believe we did the letter Dal. I discussed it in more detail, so I'm not going to go into those details right now. So, for example, here's an example from Surah Qaaf, incidentally, Surah Qaaf. So, وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. So here you can see the Qaaf has a shadda and we are stopping on it. The Qaaf has a shadda and we are stopping on it. بِالْحَقِّ. This word haqq comes a lot of times throughout the Quran where we're stopping on it. It comes over and over and over and over again. This is just one example. Like I said, 3 came just today, or more, maybe 4. So bil haqq. So now same thing, there is a qalqala on it. Bil haqq. Haqq. Q. You're seeing that q at the end. Bil haqq. But what I wanted to discuss was, in situations like this, some people may make a mistake. So the following pronunciations would be incorrect. First situation is to add a fatha sound. to add a fatha sound. Some people, they might do is وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقَّ. Haqqa. You added a fatha. That's incorrect. It's not haqqa. It's not haqqa. If you're moving your jaw afterwards, you're creating a fatha. It's not bil haqqa. Haqqa. Qa shouldn't come out. It's just haqqa. So you're just letting that area, you're just letting your tongue go. That's all that's happening. You're letting your tongue go. You're dropping your entire mouth to create a fatha. That means it's too much. So bil haqqa. Haqqa. Not haqqa. Not haqqa. Haqqa. It's a very minor difference, but of course, creating a fatha means you're messing with the actual. In this situation, if you put a fatha on there, it won't really do anything. It'll just be grammatically wrong. It won't affect the meaning. But in some ayahs, it may affect the meaning as well. So for example, and I showed you here, bil haqqa. You change bil haqqi to bil haqqa. So that would be wrong. Another thing, to make a small gap or stop before the qaf. So for example, someone pronounces it as bil haqq. So that gap that was created. A gap is called a sakta. A sakta. Sakta means when you stop somewhere in the Quran without breaking your breath. No one is allowed to do that unless you see that there's a sign there. If there's a sign there, that means it was narrated that there is sakta there. But sometimes in these ayahs, someone might say, bil haqq. You see that gap? Bil haqq. That would be incorrect because you're adding a sakta in the Quran somewhere where it's not narrated. There will be a slight pause. Why? Because the qaf is 2 letters. The first qaf is a sakin qaf, and the second letter is a qaf with a kasra. So the first sakin qaf will not actually have a qalqala because it has a shadda, and I discussed this when we talked about ba and dal. You can see it there. But there shouldn't be a pause between this. So it should just be bil haqq, bil haqq, haqq, haqq. It shouldn't be haqq. That's incorrect. And just very simple example, if you weren't stopping, how would we read it? Bil haqqi, bil haqqi. So how come when we're stopping, all of a sudden haqq? So that mud, or whatever you want to call it, which is basically a sakta technically, that should not be happening in this situation. It should be flowing. Bil haqq, bil haqq. That's the second error. Third error is exaggerating the qalqala, but adding too much force. This happens a lot with qaf. So for example, this is the only way I could show it by enlarging the qaf's font. So for example, someone's reading normally, وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. Like all of a sudden the qaf becomes like وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. Like it became like, that's not a major error, but keeping in mind that your rhythm of the Quran, the way you start reading, it should be somewhat similar throughout. So all of a sudden there's force being given on the qaf. This happens not only on the qaf, it happens with dals and other letters too. It shouldn't be bil haqq. Like all of a sudden, like bil haqq. It should be just normal. Bil haqq. Bil haqq. It's just, you're just letting your tongue go, nothing else. Bil haqq. It's not nothing, no force required. Bil haqq. And that's some common errors that may happen in situations like this. So that's it for today. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue on with the next letters. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka.